Medieval farming techniques? Well, let's just say they were groundbreaking in their own right. But love them or hate them, they all played a vital role in shaping the way our ancestors lived, worked, and ate. In this journey through time, we'll uncover 15 medieval farming hacks that will make you appreciate the ingenuity and resilience of our agricultural ancestors. 1 3-field crop rotation. Back in the Middle Ages, farmers didn't have fancy tractors, genetically modified crops, or YouTube tutorials on how to grow the biggest pumpkin in the village. What they did have, however, was an incredible farming hack called the 3-field crop rotation system. A simple yet genius way to keep their land productive, their stomachs full, and their lords happy, which was very important unless you fancied a career as a dungeon resident. Before this innovation, many medieval farmers used a 2-field system. Half the land was planted, while the other half was left fallow, a fancy word for taking a dirt nap. While this worked, it meant a lot of land wasn't producing anything. So, in a way we can say the 3-field system was a true medieval glow-up for farming. Now, how did this work? The concept was simple. Farmers divided their land into 3 sections instead of 2. Each year, they rotated crops among the 3 fields. One field was planted with wheat or rye. These grains were the medieval equivalent of fast food, making up most of the daily bread, literally. Another field got legumes like peas, beans, or lentils. Not only did this add variety to the medieval diet, hello, fiber, but these plants also helped replenish nitrogen in the soil. This was a big deal because, as it turns out, plants get hungry too. The 3rd field was left fallow. It was basically on a vacation, getting a break so it could recover and be used the next year. Each year, the fields would rotate, ensuring that no patch of soil got too exhausted from growing the same thing over and over. It was like a spa retreat for dirt. This system was a huge game changer during the medieval era, because before this system, overworked soil produced smaller harvests, which meant more hungry people, which eventually led to bad things like famines, peasant revolts, and very grumpy villagers. With the 3-field system, food production increased significantly. More food meant more people could survive and even thrive, leading to population growth, economic development, and fewer angry mobs with pitchfork situations. So, in a way, the 3-field crop rotation wasn't just about farming, it was about keeping medieval society functioning. Who knew that something as simple as giving dirt a break could change history? Next time you're enjoying a sandwich, raise a toast to those medieval farmers and their ultimate life hack. But if 3-field crop rotation wasn't your thing, then the fertilization of manure was the best next thing in your mind that could be a game changer. 2. Manure fertilization. If you ever wondered how medieval farmers managed to grow food without the fancy synthetic fertilizers we have today, the answer is simple: poop. Lots and lots of poop. Manure fertilization was the medieval equivalent of a modern-day farming hack, and let's just say, it was a real game changer in turning barren fields into lush harvests. Back in the day, medieval farmers didn't have the luxury of popping into a garden center to pick up a bag of Miracle-Gro. Instead, they relied on a tried and tested method of recycling nature's most generous gift: animal dung. Cow, horse, pig, and even human waste, yes, human, were all put to good use, enriching the soil and ensuring bountiful crops. It was sustainability at its, well, stinkiest. The science behind this rustic recycling system was quite simple. Manure was packed full of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, 3 nutrients that plants crave more than a peasant craves a full loaf of bread. By spreading manure over their fields, medieval farmers replenished the soil with essential nutrients, improving its fertility and, in turn, their chances of surviving the next harsh winter. However, this wasn't just a dump it and forget it situation. Farmers had to be strategic about their manure distribution. Too little, and their crops would be underfed. Too much, and they risked burning their fields and their noses. It was a delicate balance, kind of like seasoning food, except the seasoning smelled way worse. And let's not forget the logistics. Before tractors and mechanized spreaders, medieval farmers had to move manure the old-fashioned way, with shovels and buckets. Imagine spending your days shoveling literal tons of excrement in the blazing sun. If you ever think your job stinks, medieval farmers would like to have a word with you. Despite the obvious olfactory challenges, manure fertilization worked wonders. Without it, crops would have struggled, famine would have been even more common, and medieval banquets would have looked far less impressive. Imagine a world where kings had no bread to tear apart dramatically, or where jesters had no tomatoes to be thrown at them. Tragic. So, next time you enjoy a hearty meal, spare a thought for medieval farmers and their odd-working manure management skills. Their dedication to the art of poop-powered agriculture quite literally kept the Middle Ages fed. And if manure fertilization proves that it's not your thing, then the next key to success could be companion planting. 3. Companion planting. Alright, long before we had chemical fertilizers and pesticides, medieval farmers had to get creative with their crops. They didn't have the luxury of running to the store for a quick fix when pests attacked or plants refused to grow. Instead, they used an age-old trick called companion planting, a method so genius that even modern farmers still swear by it. So, what is companion planting? Well, it's basically medieval crop matchmaking. Certain plants, when grown together, help each other thrive, kind of like those couples who finish each other's sentences. Adorable, but also slightly annoying. One of the most famous examples of companion planting is the three sisters: corn, beans, and squash. This trio were the ultimate medieval farming hack, mainly because each plant brought something valuable to the table, like a well-balanced medieval feast. Corn stands tall and proud, acting as a support system for the beans. Basically, it's the reliable older sibling. Beans climb the corn, adding nitrogen to the soil and keeping everyone well fed. The overachiever of the group. Squash spreads across the ground, shading out weeds and keeping moisture locked in. The chill, low-maintenance friend who keeps things cool. Together, they formed a self-sufficient, low-maintenance system that reduced the need for extra work. And let's be real, medieval farmers already had enough on their plates, what with plagues, wars, and trying not to get trampled by horses. Companion planting wasn't just about helping plants grow, it was also the original form of organic pest control. Farmers paired strong-smelling plants with their crops to keep bugs at bay. Marigolds, for example, were the medieval version of a "no pests allowed" sign. Their scent repelled insects, while basil planted near tomatoes made them taste even better, because even medieval folks appreciated good pasta sauce. And let's not forget garlic. Not only did it keep vampires away, because, medieval times, but it also deterred aphids, making it a must-have in every peasant's garden. Companion planting may be an old trick, but modern farmers and gardeners still use it because, well, it works. So, next time you're out planting tomatoes, throw in some basil, and if anyone asks, just say you're using a medieval farming hack, because if it was good enough to feed knights and peasants, it's good enough for us. 4. Plowing with oxen or horses. Number 4 was in existence long before tractors, GPS-guided plows, and AI-powered irrigation. Medieval farmers had a simple yet effective method for growing food: hitching a large four-legged beast to a wooden plow and hoping for the best. While it sounds like the opening act to a very slow medieval rodeo, plowing with oxen or horses was actually a game-changer in food production. Medieval farmers had a choice: team horse or team ox. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of Apple versus Android, but with more manure. For the oxen, the slow and steady workhorses, or rather work oxen, of medieval farming, they were cheaper, easier to feed, and had the patience of a saint. The downside, they moved at roughly the same speed as a very determined snail. And the horse, on the other hand, was the fast, high-performance sports cars of the farming world. Horses could plow fields at twice the speed of oxen. But like all high-maintenance speed machines, they needed more food, more care, and probably some medieval equivalent of premium horse shampoo. Before the plow, farming was basically extreme gardening, lots of back-breaking labor with wooden sticks and an attitude of desperation. But then, farmers got smart. With oxen or horses pulling the plow, they could turn over the soil more efficiently, mix in nutrients, and get rid of weeds. More food, less effort, and a better chance of surviving winter without having to borrow your neighbor's grain stash, because medieval borrowing often involved a sword. Of course, medieval plowing wasn't all smooth sailing. There were plenty of issues like getting stuck in muddy fields, equipment malfunctions, and uncooperative animals. Plowing with oxen or horses was a true farming hack, efficient, practical, and the best way to get a field ready before winter. Sure, it came with challenges, but medieval farmers weren't afraid of a little dirt, or a lot of it. After all, without them, we wouldn't have the modern farming tech we take for granted today. So, next time you bite into a sandwich, take a moment to thank those plodding oxen and galloping horses, because they made lunch possible, one furrow at a time. 5. Raised beds for drainage. Number 5. Farming in the medieval era wasn't for the faint of heart. There were no tractors, no synthetic fertilizers, and certainly no YouTube tutorials on how to save a dying cabbage patch. Instead, medieval farmers had to rely on clever techniques to outwit the elements, one of which was the mighty raised bed, the ultimate farming hack for keeping crops from drowning in the medieval equivalent of a seasonal swamp. Picture this. It's the Middle Ages. You've got a nice little plot of land, a wooden plow, and a dream of growing enough turnips to last the winter. But then it rains, and it rains, and it rains some more. Suddenly, your precious field has turned into a muddy disaster zone, and your cabbages are floating away like tiny, green lifeboats. That's where raised beds come in, an innovation that, while simple, was a game changer. By piling up soil into elevated rows, medieval farmers created a system that improved drainage, kept plant roots from rotting, and, bonus, made the whole field look impressively organized. Raised beds were typically built by digging trenches on either side of a planting area and using the dug-up soil to form a mound. This not only prevented water from pooling, but also warmed the soil faster in spring, giving medieval crops a head start. Some farmers even lined the edges with wooden planks, woven branches, or, if they were feeling fancy, rocks. This method was especially useful in low-lying areas prone to waterlogging, such as parts of England and the Netherlands, where even a mild drizzle could turn fields into impromptu moats. Raised beds meant farmers could keep their precious crops dry and thriving, rather than watching them slowly rot into a medieval soup. Despite being centuries old, this trick is still incredibly popular today. Modern gardeners use raised beds not just for drainage, but also to improve soil quality, reduce weeds, and keep their backs from breaking. Medieval farmers didn't have the luxury of ergonomic tools, so they just powered through the back pain with sheer medieval determination. So, the next time you see a fancy raised garden bed at your local farmer's market, just remember, you're witnessing a medieval farming hack in action. And if you ever find yourself cursing at a soggy garden, just be glad you're not wearing woolen hose while doing it. 6. Terracing on hillsides. Ah, medieval farmers. Those poor souls didn't have tractors, fertilizer commercials, or even weather forecasts that didn't involve looking at the sky and guessing. Yet, they still managed to grow enough food to keep castles feasting and peasants, well, slightly less hungry. One of their most ingenious farming hacks, terracing on hillsides, essentially turning mountains into giant, medieval staircases of deliciousness. Farming on a hill is a bit like trying to eat soup off a tilted plate. It's messy, frustrating, and most of your efforts end up rolling away. Rain would wash precious soil downhill, leaving medieval farmers watching their crops relocate themselves to the valley below. But did they give up? No. They got creative and built terraces, flat, stepped plots carved into hillsides to stop their crops from playing an endless game of catch me if you can. By creating terraces, farmers could plant on flat ground, preventing erosion and keeping their soil right where they wanted it, under their crops instead of at the bottom of the hill, forming a surprise garden for their unsuspecting neighbors. The walls of these terraces, made from stone, wood, or packed earth, helped trap water and nutrients, making the soil far richer than medieval nobles pretending they weren't broke. These terraces weren't just practical, they were medieval masterpieces. Carefully designed to drain excess water without flooding lower levels, they helped farmers control irrigation naturally. It was low-tech genius, kind of like the medieval version of hacking your kitchen sink to stop it from clogging, but on a much bigger, more life-sustaining scale. Today we rave about vertical farming as a futuristic innovation, but really, medieval farmers were centuries ahead of the game. They knew stacking layers of crops upwards was an excellent way to maximize land use. Move over, hydroponics. Stone sweat and stubbornness worked just fine. Amazingly, terracing isn't just a medieval relic. Farmers in places like China, Peru, and the Philippines still use it today. So, next time you're struggling to keep a houseplant alive, just remember, medieval farmers turned hillsides into gardens without YouTube tutorials or fancy gardening apps. Now, if only they'd invented Wi-Fi along with it. 7. Hedgerows as windbreaks. Ever wonder how medieval farmers managed to grow food without fancy fertilizers, tractors, or weather apps screaming about incoming storms? The answer: hedgerows, nature's very own windbreaks. Think of them as medieval farming's version of a cheat code. If you've ever had your hat stolen by the wind, imagine what it does to crops. Strong gusts flatten young plants, strip moisture from the soil, and make life miserable for both farmers and their vegetables. Enter the hedgerow, the ultimate green force field. Medieval farmers weren't just planting crops. They were strategically growing living fences of trees, shrubs, and thorny bushes around their fields. These weren't just to keep out wandering cows and overly ambitious peasants looking for a free meal. They had serious agricultural benefits. A properly placed hedgerow slows down wind speeds dramatically, meaning fragile crops like wheat, barley, and peas could grow without getting absolutely wrecked every time a storm rolled in. Plus, the roots of these hedgerows helped prevent soil erosion, keeping the earth rich and fertile. Think of it as medieval crop insurance, minus the paperwork. And let's not forget moisture retention. Wind dries out soil faster than an over-enthusiastic baker burns bread. By acting as a barrier, hedgerows helped fields hold on to that precious rainwater, ensuring plants didn't shrivel up like a peasant after a hard day's labor. Hedgerows weren't just practical, they were overachievers. Farmers got natural pest control, fuel and fodder, and privacy. You'd think that with modern technology, we'd have ditched this ancient hack. Nope, farmers today still use hedgerows for all the same reasons. Turns out, medieval farmers were onto something, and Mother Nature approves. So, next time you see a hedgerow, tip your hat to the medieval farmers who cracked the code centuries ago. 8 irrigation canals and ditches. If you think hedgerows as windbreaks were a great hack, then irrigation canals and ditches were the arsenal of them all. Medieval farmers didn't just sit around praying for rain, think again. These folks were crafty, almost wizard-like in their ability to manipulate water. Long before fancy tractors and modern plumbing, they came up with one of the best farming hacks of all time: irrigation canals and ditches. That's right, while knights were off swinging swords, medieval farmers were out there with shovels, digging their way to agricultural success. Back in the medieval era, farming wasn't exactly a walk in the park. It was more of a struggle against nature, bad weather, and the occasional hungry noble demanding taxes and wheat. But the smart ones knew a trick. Instead of waiting for rain like a chump, why not guide the water where it's needed? And so irrigation canals and ditches were invented. These simple but effective channels redirected water from rivers, streams, or even collected rainfall, sending it straight to thirsty crops. With a few well-placed ditches, a farmer could transform dry, useless land into a lush paradise of wheat, barley, and turnips, because medieval people loved their turnips. Ditches weren't just a way to move water, they were also the medieval farmer's insurance policy against drought. When the weather got dry, irrigation ditches kept the crops alive. When it rained too much, they helped drain excess water. And as a bonus thus, they occasionally trapped a wandering chicken or an unsuspecting tax collector, though history is strangely quiet on that last part. Some villages even worked together to maintain shared irrigation systems. The canals and ditches needed regular cleaning, and the entire community would pitch in. Thank goodness to these guys who figured out that controlling water meant controlling food, and controlling food meant survival. So, next time you turn on a sprinkler, just remember, some medieval farmer, knee-deep in mud, would be absolutely amazed by your water-wasting luxury. He'd probably also ask why you're not growing more turnips. 9. Clover and legumes. Clover and legumes helped the medieval farmers to get creative to keep their soil from turning into a barren wasteland. They were the original nitrogen-fixing power duo. These plants weren't just pretty ground cover, they were the secret weapon against soil exhaustion, a problem that could make a peasant's harvest go from feast to famine real quick. Here's how it worked. Clover, peas, beans, and other legumes had a sneaky relationship with bacteria in their roots that could pull nitrogen straight out of the air and deposit it into the soil. This was like nature's version of free fertilizer. No need to haul manure or beg the local noble for better farmland. When farmers planted these crops, their fields magically became more fertile, leading to bigger harvests and fewer prayers for survival. Medieval farmers quickly realized that rotating these nitrogen-fixing plants with their wheat and barley kept the land productive year after year. This system, known as crop rotation, was like giving the soil a well-deserved spa day. Instead of getting depleted by constant grain production, fields had time to recover, rejuvenate, and bounce back better than ever. Clover was particularly beloved because it was a multitasker. Not only did it enrich the soil, but it also fed livestock, prevented erosion, and made the fields look like a medieval Instagram aesthetic. If you were a 14th century farmer, planting clover was basically the equivalent of having the ultimate life hack. Except instead of impressing your neighbors with a cool new gadget, you got bragging rights for having the healthiest crops in the village. And let's not forget the beans. These little nitrogen factories weren't just good for the soil, they were also a crucial source of protein. Peasants who relied on bread and gruel could at least count on beans to give them the strength to plow fields, wrestle stubborn oxen, and occasionally chase off tax collectors. So, while medieval farming may seem primitive compared to today's industrial agriculture, those old-timey peasants knew a thing or two about sustainability. Clovers and legumes weren't just plants, they were medieval farming's version of a cheat code, keeping fields fertile and bellies full, long before anyone had ever heard of synthetic fertilizers. 10. Mulching with straw. Farming has never felt like a walk in the park, especially in the medieval period, with no tractors, no synthetic fertilizers, and definitely no YouTube tutorials on how to grow the best turnips in the 1300s. But medieval farmers were a crafty bunch, and one of their secret weapons was, wait for it, straw mulch. Yes, the same stuff that made up their bedding, roofing, and questionable scarecrow fashion choices was also a top-tier farming hack. By spreading straw over their crops, these farmers kept soil moisture in, blocked out weeds, and prevented their precious vegetables from baking in the sun like a poorly planned medieval barbecue. Medieval farmers didn't have modern science, but they did have keen observation, and probably a fair bit of trial and error. They noticed that covering the ground with straw kept their soil cool, moist, and protected from erosion. Rain didn't wash away their hard-earned dirt, and pesky weeds had a much harder time crashing the party. Plus, as the straw decomposed, it enriched the soil with nutrients, essentially medieval composting before compost bins were a thing. Some say it was just smart farming, others, probably the local village bard, may have sung ballads about "ye magic straw that maketh the turnips great." Either way, it worked. Straw mulch wasn't just useful for crops. It also kept livestock warm in winter, made comfy, albeit itchy, mattresses, and was probably repurposed for emergency footwear when someone's shoes fell apart on the way to the market. And let's not forget that a good pile of straw made an excellent hiding spot when you needed to escape an awkward conversation with the local tax collector. Even in our high-tech, app-filled world, medieval farmers had the right idea. Straw mulching is still a fantastic way to conserve water, reduce weeds, and improve soil health without any fancy gadgets. So, next time you see a bale of straw, tip your non-straw hat to the medieval farmers who figured it out centuries ago. And maybe, just maybe, consider using some in your own garden. You'll be mulching like it's $13.99. 11. Scarecrows and noisemakers. Birds and farmers have not been friends for a very long time. It was really a serious problem. These winged bandits would swoop in like tiny feathery Vikings, raiding crops and leaving farmers shaking their fists at the sky. Without modern pesticides or fancy high-tech solutions, these medieval geniuses had to get creative. Meet the scarecrows and noisemakers, the ultimate low-budget, high-drama farming hack. The scarecrow was a masterpiece of deception. Farmers would take old clothes, probably their worst fashion choices, stuff them with straw, and prop them up in the field like some eerie, motionless farmer doppelganger. The idea was simple: trick birds into thinking there was always some grumpy peasant standing guard over the crops. Of course, not all birds were easily fooled. Some clever crows would quickly realize that Mr. Stuffed Shirt never moved, never yelled, and certainly never threw anything. Eventually, they started using the scarecrow as a perch, mocking the farmers' efforts. This led to creative upgrades. Farmers would add moving parts, scary masks, or even place actual dead birds around as a warning. It was basically medieval psychological warfare. When the scarecrow failed, medieval farmers turned to noise. This wasn't some peaceful wind chime situation. Oh no, this was a full-blown racket. Farmers would hang pots, pans, or bells that clanged together whenever the wind blew. Others stationed children in the fields to shout and wave sticks at invading birds. A medieval summer job with zero benefits. For extra dramatic effect, some farmers even used whirligigs, wooden devices that spun and clattered in the wind, scaring birds senseless. It was the medieval equivalent of a motion-activated alarm system, except powered by the elements and a farmer's desperation. Do you think this ever worked? Well, sort of. Some birds fell for the trickery, while others adapted like feathery masterminds. But Medieval farmers kept at it because, at the end of the day, the only thing worse than listening to endless clanging and shouting was losing your entire barley crop to a flock of smug crows. And that is how medieval farmers turned farming into an ongoing battle of wits between man and bird, one scarecrow at a time. 12. Common pasture system. Long before fancy fertilizers and high-tech tractors, medieval farmers had to rely on their wits, their neighbors, and, well, their cows' insatiable appetite for grass. The common pasture system, a genius farming hack that lets everyone share grazing land instead of each farmer keeping a tiny, sad patch of grass for their own livestock. Picture this. It's the 12th century, and you're a humble peasant with exactly one cow. You could try to keep her in your backyard, but that tiny strip of land behind your hut won't keep her full for long. Plus, she's already eaten your roof's thatch once, and you'd rather not repeat that disaster. That's where the common pasture comes in. Under this system, villages designated large areas of land where all farmers could send their livestock to graze. It was a win-win. Animals got plenty to eat, and farmers got free fertilizer in return. Yes, cow poop was basically medieval gold. Plus, since everyone was using the same land, there was a built-in social network, the medieval equivalent of a farmer's market mixed with a neighborhood gossip session. But, of course, no system is perfect. Some sneaky farmers might have tried to slip a few extra sheep into the pasture, hoping nobody would notice. Others may have grown suspicious when Old Man Jeffrey's cows started looking suspiciously plump compared to everyone else's. And let's not forget the occasional turf wars, because nothing says community spirit like arguing over who gets the best grazing spot. Despite its quirks, the common pasture system was an early lesson in sustainable farming. It prevented overgrazing by rotating fields, kept the soil healthy, and ensured that even small-scale farmers could keep livestock. Without it, medieval feasts might have been a lot sadder and a lot less meaty. So, next time you see a cow casually munching away in a field, take a moment to appreciate the medieval farmers who figured out that sharing really is caring, especially when it comes to grass and, well, manure. 13. Beekeeping for pollination. Long before modern farmers had high-tech irrigation, pesticides, and YouTube tutorials on how to grow the perfect pumpkin, medieval farmers had to get creative. One of their most ingenious farming hacks was beekeeping, not just for honey, though, let's be honest, mead was a medieval must-have, but for pollination. Yes, that's right. While today's farmers rely on science and controlled pollination, medieval farmers let nature do the work, armed only with a few wooden hives, some protective gear that was probably just a thick tunic, and a whole lot of bravery. Because, let's face it, messing with bees is not for the faint of heart. Bees were the original unpaid laborers of the medieval world. While the farmers toiled in the fields and the lords counted their gold, bees were busy zipping from flower to flower, making sure crops like apples, beans, and berries actually produced food. Without them, medieval diets would have been even more depressing than they already were. Medieval beekeepers knew that placing hives near their fields meant better harvests. They might not have understood pollination on a scientific level, but they've gained the results: bigger crops, more food, and of course, a steady supply of honey for sweetening gruel. Because what's life without a little joy? Now, beekeeping back then wasn't exactly glamorous. There were no fancy beekeeping suits, just wool, leather, and pure determination. Getting stung was an occupational hazard, and if you think modern bees are aggressive, imagine the ones from an age when everything, including the wildlife, was just a little angrier. But despite the stings, medieval farmers knew that keeping bees was worth it. Without pollinators, their crops would struggle, and no one wanted to face a food shortage, especially when famine was already a regular visitor. Today, we have scientific proof of what medieval farmers already suspected. Bees are essential for growing food. Their old-school farming hack still holds up, proving that sometimes history's best solutions are the simplest. Just add bees and let them do their thing. And hey, if it worked for medieval farmers without Wi-Fi or tractors, it's gotta be worth a shot. 14. Selective breeding. Long before modern farmers had spreadsheets and genetic engineering, medieval farmers had something even more powerful: patience, a good eye, and a surprising willingness to play matchmaker for their cows and cabbages. That's right, selective breeding was the original farming hack, helping medieval peasants grow better food, one generation at a time. Imagine you're a medieval farmer. You have 2 cows. One gives lots of milk but has a bad attitude. Let's call her Bessie the Menace. And the other is friendly but produces just enough milk to fill a thimble. What do? You pair up Bessie the Menace with a nice sturdy bull in hopes that their calf will be both productive and pleasant. If not, well, at least you tried. This slow but steady matchmaking process eventually led to cows that were better suited for milking, plowing, and not kicking their owners in the face every morning. The same strategy worked wonders for crops. Medieval farmers noticed that some wheat grew taller, resisted disease, and, most importantly, didn't die at the first sign of bad weather. Instead of replanting any old seeds, they saved the best ones, ensuring each generation of wheat was a little stronger, tastier, and slightly less of a drama queen. Over time, this simple trick turned scrawny wild plants into the juicy fruits, sturdy grains, and hefty vegetables that kept medieval bellies full. Of course, this wasn't an exact science. Sometimes you'd breed two big pigs hoping for an even bigger pig, only to end up with an unusually stubborn pig instead. But trial and error eventually paid off, leading to bigger harvests, better livestock, and fewer farmers wondering why their carrots looked like sad, shriveled twigs. So, while modern agriculture relies on fancy tech, let's take a moment to appreciate medieval farmers, the original DIY geneticists. They didn't have labs, but they had keen observation, a little luck, and a lot of awkward barnyard matchmaking. And that, my friends, is how we went from wild wheat to bread, from tiny cattle to juicy steaks, and from struggling to survive to thriving on farms. 15 winter cover crops. And lastly on the list is winter cover crops. Back in the Middle Ages, farmers didn't have fancy fertilizers or high-tech tractors. They had dirt, a plow, and an alarming lack of personal hygiene. Every growing season, they took as much as they could from the land, grains, vegetables, even a few surprise potatoes before they officially became a thing in Europe. But without replenishing nutrients, the soil quickly became about as useful as a wooden sword in battle. Winter cover crops were the ultimate medieval life hack. Instead of letting their fields sit barren and exposed to the elements, farmers planted hardy crops like clover, vetch, rye, and peas. These weren't just filler plants, they were soil superheroes. Thanks to these green-thumb tactics, medieval farmers improved soil health, increased yields, and avoided total starvation, always a plus. Cover crops meant better spring planting, healthier fields, and fewer angry villagers showing up with torches demanding more bread. Fast forward to today, and modern farmers still use this method. It turns out those medieval peasants weren't just good at growing turnips and surviving the plague, they were accidentally pioneering sustainable agriculture. So, next time you hear someone call medieval times the Dark Ages, remind them, those folks were cover cropping geniuses who hacked their way to better harvests long before organic farming was cool. And there you have it, 15 genius farming hacks medieval farmers used to keep their crops thriving. From companion planting to crop rotation, these methods weren't just old school, they were essential for survival. And guess what? Many of these techniques are still used today, proving that medieval farmers knew their stuff. So, next time you see a well-irrigated field or hear about natural pest control, remember, these ideas have been around for centuries. It's pretty mind-blowing to think that without these simple but effective strategies, history might have played out very differently. No food, no civilization. Yeah, it's that serious. If you found these medieval farming tricks fascinating, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment on which hack surprised you the most. And if you want to learn more about ancient survival techniques, check out our other videos. We've got plenty of history-packed content coming your way. See you next time.